Welcome. This is the Ed Funders, Grant Makers for Education Out of School Time Impact Group. This is our Friday monthly convening call. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Goldberg, and I'm a co-facilitator of the Impact Group with Kathleen Trapphagen. And I'm thrilled to have you and our speakers with us. Today, we are going to be talking about policy for the out of school time field. So we've invited a couple guests who have some perspectives on what they're thinking about in terms of what to look out for, what could be coming, what are some opportunities, potential challenges ahead, and I'm excited to have them share their perspectives. To get started this morning and to warm ourselves up, we'd love for you to, first of all, change your Zoom name to include your name, your pronouns, and your organization, because that always helps us to get to know each other better. And then would love for you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Please, again, share your name, pronoun, and organization. And our intro question or prompt for today is in honor of Women's History Month. We'd love for you to share someone that you're honoring today by bringing them into the room and share their name in the chat. So we can have lots of strong women leaders in the room with us today. All right, so I mentioned that we're going to be talking about policy in these calls. The topics vary month to month. We always welcome your feedback and ideas, so always feel free to reach out if you have suggestions for future months. Sort of still the beginning of the year-ish, and so we wanted to we usually do a topic around what's ahead in 2024 for the field policy-wise. We've got some terrific speakers with us today who have a lot to share. I did want to encourage you to use the chat. If you have questions along the way, folks may be able to answer them directly in the chat. We're going to save time as well for you to ask questions of our speakers. And if folks are talking too fast, if you go to the reactions button in your screen, there's a slow down button. It's kind of two arrows pointing to the left. I've pushed it for myself. It'll stay on until you take it off. So that's just an option if you want to use that, if folks need to slow down a little bit, because sometimes there could be a lot of content to share. So today we're thrilled to have a number of speakers. We have Erik Peterson here, who will start us off with from the Afterschool Alliance with an overall outlook on the field for policy. Erik is Senior Vice President of Policy at the Afterschool Alliance. Then we'll have Elizabeth Gaines, who's the founder and CEO of Children's Funding Project, sharing an exciting opportunity. Then we'll have Brian Ortega, who's K-12 Senior Policy Analyst from Unidos US. And then we'll have Horatio Blackman from National Urban League, Vice President of Education Policy, Advocacy, and Engagement, sharing perspectives. We'll put the link in the chat to their bios so you can learn more about them. And I'm going to invite Erik to come on the screen and share some slides and what's coming up for the Alliance.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay? We're good. Thanks so much, Rebecca, and thanks for the opportunity today. Let me just get slides going.
And Erik, let me just have you take a moment to introduce yourself for us and just share a little bit about how you came to think about policy as your lever for change in the field.
Will do. Thanks so much. So again, I'm Erik Peterson. I serve as Senior Vice President for Policy at the Afterschool Alliance. Oh, yikes. Okay. And I've been with the Afterschool Alliance since 2009, and really have worked to understand the barriers at the local level that sometimes policy can get in the way, but also can be a real helper in terms of opportunity to help programs tap into additional funds and or make connections that they might not, otherwise not be able to do. So addressing those challenges through federal policy, increasing available funding, but also minimizing the barriers to accessing some of that funding at the local level is sort of what brings me to the policy space. And yeah, so today I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of walking through the federal out of school time policy outlook at the Afterschool Alliance. We spend a lot of effort in sort of tracking and trying to understand what is going on, trying to identify those opportunities at the local level, but again, also identifying those challenges in ways that we can be helpful in terms of addressing some of those challenges to accessing those funds. going to start with sort of appropriations landscape. And I'm going to try not to be too negative today, but I would say the overall sort of outlook for federal funding is bleak. I think most folks who pay attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C. would agree with that. That said, I do have some positive things that we can talk about over the course of the next few minutes. So we're about 6 months into the 2024 federal fiscal year. We have, as of last Friday, a week ago, half of government spending bills funded and half not. Unfortunately, one of the ones that has not yet been funded is the Department of Education Labor, Health, and Human Services bill, which is critical for funding for things like the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, for other Department of Education funding, Title I, full service community schools, as well as some of the funding streams in the Department of Labor that help support youth workforce development, and in Health and Human Services, which supports childcare and a number of other important funding streams for the out-of-school time field. And so as a reminder, sort of going into fiscal year 2024, the main funding stream for after school and summer learning, which is 21st Century Community Learning Centers at the Department of Education, which can be accessed by both community-based organizations, local government, school districts, and many other eligible entities. That was proposed for level funding at $1.3 billion in the president's budget for FY24. That came out about a year ago. Both the House and the Senate in their spending bills, they also proposed level funding at $1.3 billion, which in context is important, particularly on the House side, where education funding was proposed to be significantly cut, including pretty big cuts to propose to Title I and other key education programs. So it's a testament to the bipartisan support that 21st Century Community Learning Centers has enjoyed the whole 25 years of its existence. That said, with increasing costs, and we'll talk a lot about that today, level funding really, in a sense, is a cut at the local level. And we know that the needs far exceed that in terms of the number of grantees that apply for those funds in all 50 states, the number of students waiting, 25 million students that would be in an after school or summer program if one were available. So we know that the need continues to be much more than that amount. And for that reason, us at the After School Alliance and many allies and advocates for after school and summer have been pushing for an increase of $750 million, both for fiscal year 2024, but also as we get into talking about fiscal year 2025. All that said, progress is slowly being made on the, even though we're 6 months in. And 2 weeks ago, the president signed into law, or actually, yes, no, 2 weeks ago signed into law the latest continuing resolution extending government funding at the fiscal year 2023 levels. Some of those bills, again, were addressed in a bill that passed a week ago now, the fiscal 2024 spending bill with that passed on March 8th. That includes things like commerce, justice, science. We did see in there a $3 million cut to the youth mentoring funding stream, some cuts to juvenile justice and STEM education that are all in the commerce, justice, science bill. And that's an indicator, I think, what we'll see in the education bill as well. Again, for education and the other 6 funding bills that have yet to pass, including other things like defense and homeland security, those are going along at fiscal year 2023 levels until the deadline of March 22nd, which is now, I guess, about a week away, right? We are hoping and hearing that Sunday night, so in a couple of days, that bill, the draft of that bill will come out. So likely we'll know what the proposed level for 21st Century Community Learning Centers will be for 2024. There's no sure thing, no done deals, but hopefully, fingers crossed, by this time, 1 week from today, we'll have the rest of those fiscal year 2024 funding bills done and pass the House and the Senate and signed into law. And we'll at least know and have that stability of what the funding level is. And hopefully, again, at least it will be level funding as well. Moving on, though, to fiscal year 2025. That process actually kicked off this week as well. Last Thursday, we saw the State of the Union address from the president. And for the first time that we know of, expanded learning time, youth development type programs were mentioned. The president singled out summer learning, but also tutoring, youth apprenticeships, And that's really important in terms of there's not a lot of things that can be covered in an hour and a half speech. And so having it elevate to that level, is an indication of this administration's the importance that they've put on programs that help and support young people. The FY25 President's Request, budget request, which then came out this past Monday, does once again have level funding for 21st century, does have some increases for Title I, and full service community schools and a couple other child care development block grant, a couple other funding streams. But what's key here is the budget does meet the spending caps of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that passed in 2023, which sort of prohibits a lot of proposed increases on discretionary funding. It does, and I'll probably mention this a couple times, it does include a new program, an $8 billion mandatory funding program, so it would not be subject to those spending caps, something called the Academic Acceleration and Achievement Grants. This would be a new funding stream sort of in line with the president's agenda that was announced back in January around academic acceleration and achievement. It would go from state education agencies to school districts, focusing on high need school districts. It would be, again, $8 billion over 5 years that would be for grants specific to 3 main focus areas as it's proposed. One being after school, summer, and expanded learning. The second being high dosage tutoring, and the third being activities that address chronic absenteeism. So we were, obviously pleased to see that. That said, in this climate with the fiscal constraints that Congress has for the budget, it's not necessarily a sure thing at all that any kinds of new programs like this. That said, and the fact that it's mandatory funding, wouldn't be subject to those caps. We will, as part of the appropriation process, are also starting our advocacy again this year for continue to increase for 21st century community learning centers. The next couple of months, you'll see hearings with Secretary of Education and others making the case for the president's budget. You will see the FY25 spending bills be introduced and mark up. Those are all opportunities to weigh in and talk about the importance of funding for youth development programs and school time programs. We will, at Afterschool Alliance, be having our legislative conference, Afterschool for All Challenge, where we'll have an opportunity for folks from all 50 states to come and meet with their members of Congress on this too. Just as a context piece as well, the Speaker of the House has said he wants to try to get fiscal year 25 done, before the September 30th deadline, so that members can go home and campaign. It is an election year, though, which means even more partisanship than usual. Obviously, Congress had a really difficult time passing the fiscal year 2024 spending bill. So the prospects of trying to get 25 done as well, I think is going to be a challenge. But again, is also an opportunity to make the case around what priorities we feel are important for the field. In terms of other things going on in Congress and sort of the federal outlook, there are a number of areas where we see bipartisanship and support. One of those is in youth workforce development and the reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The House Education Committee, in a bipartisan way, passed a bipartisan bill last year. The Senate Help Committee, which is where education lives in the Senate, is working on that bill as well, and hope to have something passed by late May. Again, it's an opportunity if you work with older youth programs or have an interest in old youth 21st century skill development for young people, weighing in with the importance of out-of-school time programs and community-based organizations and school districts and partnerships with employers are all areas where we've had really good conversations with folks on the Hill around where the field has been lifting their voices. In particular, the Youth Workforce Readiness Act that a number of out-of-school time organizations have been supporting for several years now, bipartisan legislation, the House and Senate. It could be a part of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act to provide direct funding to out-of-school time organizations to help focus on youth workforce development. Some of the other things that I wanted to flag is that with the help of many on the call today, including Grantmakers for Education, but also the National After School Association and others, we've been working on a workforce policy agenda that actually will be explored in more detail at the NAA conference starting early next week. But one key piece of that is increased pay and benefits for all program staff. And we know from surveys from the field that staffing and costs in general continue to rise. Which is, again, circles back to the need for increased federal funding for 21st Century Community Learning Center, for Child Care Development Block Grant, for potentially this new $8 billion funding stream. Other opportunities that allow both increased access for students, but really also an acknowledgement that pay needs to increase and that some of the key costs for after school and youth programs, for quality programs, really need more funds to be able to cover those costs. Wouldn't be a complete sort of federal outlook with also talking a little bit about priorities for the administration. And so I'm just going to spend a minute there as well. At the Department of Education, their Engage Every Student initiative enters its third year this year and continues to really be an important in connecting partners, school districts with community partners around accessing American Rescue Plan funds for after school and summer. Also flagging a new recognition program that was announced by the Engage Every Student initiative in the Department of Ed a week ago, actually last Friday, that allows recognition for community-based organizations and city-run programs in partnership with schools doing after school and summer, and really supporting young people using some of the COVID relief funds. So it'll be a way to elevate the work of those partnerships and the outcomes that are achieved by those, really setting the stage for the need to continue to sustain programs that were funded and expanded by American Rescue Plan funds. Also at the Department of Education, I mentioned the Improving Student Achievement Agenda that was announced in January with that focus on chronic absenteeism, after school and summer, and then tutoring, which aligns with that $8 billion new proposed program. Look for more in that effort. The White House had an event on summer learning consistent with that agenda just 2 days ago, and we'll continue to do more to raise the profile of that. And then at HHS, at Health and Human Services, final proposed new, for the first time in almost 10 years, Child Care Development Block Grant regulations, which for the first time really emphasize the importance of school age programs, is out there for comment as well. We've seen new rules for TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, which a number of states use to support after school and summer. Some changes afoot there as well. So lots of opportunities, again, to learn more. Lots of this is on our website as well, in terms of advocacy opportunities to make sure that these funding streams do respond to the needs of the local community. I'm going to spend a second on the sustainability piece. I know my colleagues on the panel are going to be speaking more to this, but really the key with the American Rescue Plan funds, which expire on the education side about in January 2025, and then the state and local fiscal recovery funds in 2026. The need to continue those investments and those programs rather on after those funding deadlines come has really been a focus of us, and I know many on the call and many in the field. A quick graphic here, which is kind of complicated, but basically what it shows is about 8 billion. We estimate about at the after school lines about 8 billion in summer in federal COVID relief education funds were spent on summer and after school, both through school districts and state education agencies, and about 2 billion of the state and local fiscal recovery funds at a minimum. There might have been more than that. That's total of 10 billion served about 5 million children that did not have access to expanded learning opportunities after school and summer prior to those investments. Again, we know the need is still much more, but this was certainly a really strong investment when you compare it to sort of the annual investment in 21st century of about $1 billion. Seeing 10 billion over 3 years invest in the field is exciting, but also we know a big challenge to sustain those funds moving forward. The good news there, I said, started out bleak, and I'll end on the positive note. And that is that there is a lot of momentum based on the outcomes from American Rescue Plan funds for after school and summer at the local level and the state level. So while the federal budget outlook is looking challenging, we still have a lot of states that continue to be running surpluses, and also just a lot of interest by governors, by state legislators, and by parents and young people and advocates as well as providers and the education community, the law enforcement community, the healthcare community, who really acknowledge and see, maybe their eyes were open during the pandemic, to the importance of quality after school summer youth programs. So we've seen over the last 3 years now, in a number of states from Alabama, Minnesota, Michigan, New Mexico, Oregon, Texas, and more, the investments in after school and summer, often in states where they've never before had any state funding streams. So we're up to 22 states now that have state funding streams for after school and summer. And not on this list are things like Pennsylvania, where the governor last month proposed 11 million for after school, South Dakota that introduced legislation for 10 million for after school and summer for the first time ever, as well as Oregon, which is on here, which passed last week or the week before, a $30 million investment in state funds for summer learning programs, where community partners will be able to work with schools to provide quality summer learning. So that was a lot. Hopefully I didn't go over my time, and happy to take questions later after this. And I will transition, I guess, back to Rebecca or directly to Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks so much, Erik. Clearly you had a lot to share. We're going to put a link to your slides in the chat so folks can check that out later. Also, if you have questions to clarify anything that Erik may have shared, please do put your questions in the chat and he can do his best to respond. So I'm going to welcome Elizabeth Gaines to join us and share from her perspective. Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Sure, great. And who else learns so much every time Erik opens his mouth? I feel like he's got a lot to share. So thank you, Erik. I'm going to go study your slides later. I'm Elizabeth Gaines. I think, Rebecca, you'd asked a question about like, how did we get engaged in policy in the beginning? And interestingly, my first policy job was in Missouri, my home state, as an advocate trying to secure tobacco settlement dollars for children and youth. So I'm coming full circle. And I know this topic today is about policy priorities for 2024. Well, some things take longer than that from inception to reality. So I'm sort of the little PSA, the little bird in your ear, in this group of folks talking about what's happening immediately this year. I just want to make sure that our field is really, prepared for what could be a pretty significant windfall that could mean real deep dollars for youth development if we organize ourselves appropriately. So just I'm going to skip over who we are. Hopefully you know who Children's Funding Project is already. If not, reach out. I'm happy to talk about it. What I want to talk about, though, is this notion that, one of the things we're trying to do is help people figure out at the state, community, Native Nations level, where can funding come from to support our goals for children and youth. So we focus on a lot of these things. For 2024, there's some pretty exciting things happening around voter approved children's funds. There's a lot. I mean, what Erik was talking about with the investments that states are making in out of school time for the first time, really exciting that they're practicing using those muscles. We should keep policymakers doing that. So that's all good stuff. There's this little thing that I want to talk about, legal settlements. Well, why would we be involved in that? Part of, our goal is really to make sure that we've got the right kind of infrastructure in place as a field to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. So, like I said, when I started my career, it was really focusing on how do we make sure that tobacco settlement windfall, which, $8 billion a year for how many years, going to states to do, whatever states, I guess, felt like doing with those resources. It would have been great had we been organized as a field to be able to really direct where some of those resources were going for kids. Same thing with the opioid settlement. We saw the country learn a little bit more about, how to make sure those resources get directed in the right place. Well, I've been talking about this notion of, social media and the potential for some sort of a master settlement agreement for the last, 7-8 years. And things have really started to pick up and move. And I want us to be prepared should something happen. So hundreds of lawsuits have been filed against social media companies over the past several years. for the harms that they have done to youth mental health. And this last October, 33 state attorneys general actually filed a collective lawsuit against Meta for harms to youth mental health. 9 other state attorneys general have filed similar but separate lawsuits. These things are sort of becoming compared to what happened with tobacco in the 90s and with opioids more recently. Given the ability of out-of-school time programs to address the harms to youth mental health that were discussed in these lawsuits, specifically to protect and improve youth wellness and invest in positive youth development, I see that as being a really perfect antidote to some of those harms, right? So like imagine any young person in your life that you care about, what would you want them to be doing instead of doom scrolling, for instance? I have 17, 19, 24-year-old boys in my house, and I can think of all kinds of things, whether it's like playing the trumpet or making a crepe or building a trail. I mean, the list is endless of things that we would want to see them doing, right? This opportunity, I think, presents a chance for this field to really think about what those things are, think forward post-COVID about what we want for our young people, get young people involved in that conversation. And so what we want to do is be able to get sharp about how we put that list together and think about the ways to get that message out and make sure that should a settlement pass, we're really teed up to make sure those resources are going into states in really effective ways. So some of the things that are happening, already we're seeing medical associations and think tanks and schools really get engaged in this and thinking about, how to address harms to youth. Again, we just want to make sure that it's not simply money should go to schools or money should go to youth mental health, but what does it look like? What are those positive antidotes that we want to invest in? So, I think right now we're not at the table. Right now, it's not getting recommended in those various, guidance documents that are coming out, and we need to get at that table. So, we need to be making sure our experts in our field are having a seat at that table and that we're, putting really good information in front of folks for that. We need to make sure that policymakers are understanding that this is a solution. And then we need to be talking to journalists and media about, making sure our message gets out there. So I'm probably over time. This is my last little message. We are right now at Children's Funding Project trying to just create a container for the field to come together to think about how we start to lay this groundwork. So it's going to be, a couple year at least strategy. We want to do hour-long briefing meetings with different groups, talking to the folks who care about sports, who care about creative youth development, who care about outdoor education, who care after after-school and relationship building. All of those things are in scope for what could really work here. So these are the things we're trying to get folks to sort of have in the back of their minds right now, and more from us in the coming months, and please do get engaged.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And if you want to reach out to me, my email's here. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I was going to say, how can folks get engaged?
Yeah.
So you have her email address. We'll share those slides with you as well. So appreciate you alerting everyone to that opportunity. Terrific. So now we're going to invite Brian to come into the room. So Brian, love for you to introduce yourself as well and share a little bit about how you've come to work on policy and what Unidos is thinking about for the out-of-school time field.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Rebecca. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Ed Funders for this space. I think that it's incredibly important. And being a former OST provider working with the YMCA, I understand, and this is near and dear to home. So for me, I know the change that this can make with students, with families. And for me, that's why I take it personally. And being given this opportunity to work with Unidos US to advocate on the federal level on the importance of out-of-school time and to get people to see how exactly this ties into the educational learning of students. For me, it's been an incredible journey to be here with you all. And so Unidos US is proud to be a partner in this work as a convener. And we're amazed at seeing the work that is happening across the national landscape. and to see what our partners have accomplished and what's going on and what we're doing. And so this presentation is to speak on Unidos US and the work and how we've tied into out of school time learning and the impacts that it's having on the Latino community and with students and their families. So diving right into it, I want to take a little moment to speak on who Unidos US is and how this will tie into the out of school time learning. But we're committed to racial equity, immigration, education, health, voting power, and workforce development. And this past year, Unidos US launched its new strategic priorities, where our organizational pillars are focusing on helping the Latino community to build long-term wealth, health, and power. And we've engaged with conversations with our affiliates, with partners, national leaders, and have participated in several convenings, summits, and conversations on ways that for us to support student learning and to address the learning loss that's occurred because of the pandemic. And one of the areas that continued to present itself was out of school time learning. And out of school time learning we know, helps youth develop the skills that create long-term wealth for students and their families, and provide safe and healthy environments for continued learning and empower students in their educational pursuits. So because of this, we've deepened our collaboration with partners and experts in out of school time, such as the Afterschool Alliance and the National Summer Learning Association. And so now going into how Unidos US is tying into the work of out of school time. So referencing back our strategic priorities, Unidos US continues to look for innovative ways to empower families, especially after the toll of the pandemic. And what the data is showing us is that that the time that students are in the classroom today is not enough to make up for the time that they were away from school during the pandemic. And after school programs, summer camps, tutoring, extracurricular offerings are all tools that help address student learning loss. And this also ties into the social emotional growth of student learning because of the fact that they have those interactions, not just with their peers, but with mentors and educators that they're able to interact with that they wouldn't get in a virtual setting. And so out of school time is more than just recreational play. It's an opportunity and a way for students to grow mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so what this brought us to is for us to go to our affiliates and to our partners and to see what is happening on the ground, because on a federal level, it's very easy to say that everything's fine and dandy. But when we actually went down into the level of our affiliates and seeing the work that's happening, you learn a lot. And so Unidos US did interviews this past fall, one of which I was included in. Prior to coming to Unidos US, I was working with Acero Charter Schools, which is based out of Chicago, which is where I'm at. And we were able to identify organizations that are working with OST providers and providing out of school time learning from Arizona, California, Florida, Illinois, and Texas. And these interviews were conducted individually with these staff to understand more about the work that is happening with students, with parents, and how all of this is tying in together with student learning. And while we understand that these states and these affiliates may not be representative of all out of school time programs, we believe that these areas are great ways of us to be able to capture diverse groups, diverse families, and specific communities that are serving Hispanic and Latino communities. And what we were able to find were best practices from our affiliates. And one of the things that was amazing and that I love to see is the importance of partnerships and how organizations, schools, and all these different entities are coming together to address the learning loss that has happened because of the pandemic. And also, what we're seeing is that our affiliates are tackling systemic barriers like drug and gang prevention, apprenticeship programs, social emotional learning, and they're offering wraparound services that support students and their families, as well as their caregivers. Now, when we go into the challenges, what we're seeing is some of the concerns that was common across the board is how programs will continue after ESSER. And what we saw is that this ties into how OST providers were managing staffing, how they were managing transportation, cost of transportation, and high quality programs. So we are continuing to have these conversations with our affiliates. We're continuing to engage in various ways to bring our affiliates up and to provide these best practices and to have peer-to-peer engagement, one of which I was able to participate in, and two other of the affiliates that were interviewed in this. They were brought to the NSLA summit in DC this past year. And what we love about this is creating this opportunity for peers to engage with one another and to share best practices. So we want to continue to support this work because we understand the importance of it. So one of the things that Unidos US did was we launched the Latino Student Recovery Report to really take a deep dive into how and where students are at today after the pandemic. And what we found was incredible because we were able to see that Latino middle school students will need an additional 6.7 months in reading and 6.4 months in math to get to pre-pandemic levels of learning. This has also brought upon chronic absenteeism that schools are seeing and addressing that motivation to get students to come back into the classroom, as well as a rise in mental health challenges, including suicidal ideation, depression, and anxiety. So while we know that these categories are big in scale, we understand that OST may not be the full answer to these problems, but it's definitely part of the solution. And so we were able to identify and know that out of school time offers additional learning opportunities, academic support, enriching and engaging spaces for learning, social emotional support, and culturally and linguistic support for multilingual learners and English language learners. And so what we are doing is we're grabbing all these different pieces, we're grabbing our affiliates, we're grabbing our findings, and we're putting it together with research to back it up. And we're developing a practice to policy brief that will put all this information together for everyone to view it and to understand it. And what we're proposing when it comes to the recommendation is increased federal appropriations in key federal programs that support locally driven, high quality out of school time programs such as Title I, Title IV, and the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. Now, when it comes to the states, I love how Erik has already identified states that are on the ground already working towards solution. We're calling on them to strengthen the implementation of and access to out of school time programs, create incentives for partnerships and local school districts and out of school time providers, which we're starting to see now, prioritize equity and quality in the creation and administration of all out of school time programs, especially for underserved communities, and additionally having targeted interventions in place for schools that serve high percentage of multilingual and English learners that display areas of that achievement gap, such as low graduation rates and chronic absenteeism. And so where do we go from here? Well, what we're doing is we know that this is going to take all of us. This is going to take work for all of us to come together and to really work on a solution and to continue to support these initiatives. It's not a one day to the next type of avenue, right? And so what we're asking for providers and program partners is to forge partnerships to continue to engage in meaningful conversations, to offer accessible and enriching programs for students and families, organize diverse extracurricular offerings, and embrace technology and to implement that into the learning for our students. As for our policymakers, we're asking for them to support policies that prioritize funds and initiatives that promote academic enrichment during non-school hours, advocate for increased collaboration and culturally and linguistically responsive programming, and to allocate resource and funds for services such as tutoring, homework assistance, and a variety of extracurricular offerings. Now, when we go into our philanthropic partners, we're asking for the support to and elevate initiatives of academic enrichment and holistic development, elevate the role of intermediaries and community-based organizations as key partners, and for all of us to just continue to have these spaces for us to talk and to come together and to figure out best practices and solutions that support our students. And that is it. I hope I wasn't over time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to hear everything that Unidos is doing to support its affiliates on the ground, and also how you're lifting up their direct experiences in the field and that it's informing your policy work. So we're looking forward to that brief to come out. We'll share those slides for everybody, and I'm going to, so thank you so much, Brian. I'm going to invite Horatio to join the room.
All right.
Thank you for being here. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and share how you got into this policy role and what you're thinking about from the National Urban League perspective.
Certainly, and thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Horatio Blackman. I'm the Vice President of Education Policy, Advocacy, and Engagement at the National Urban League. I've been with the league for about 3 years now. Broadly, how I came to value policy in part was through lived experience, and I'm going to share some of the lived experience of the young people that we support in our affiliates. But we know that some of the biggest gains that the OST field has made in advancing equity is a result of advocacy, which has led to meaningful policy change that has created the structures and funding for more equitable learning and developmental opportunities for Black and other underserved communities. Policy, plain and simple, is important because, one, it's a signal about what works, about what we believe is working, also what doesn't work. And it's a signal about what our values are as individuals, as communities, as states, and as the nation. It's also a driver for funding and for structures to support the out-of-school time ecosystem. Philanthropy, as we know, is essential to and has been essential to supporting and growing the OST field. But policy is really, really important in addressing issues of equity that we also see in out-of-school time and other learning spaces, such as the traditional K-12 environment. At the National Urban League, we are in this space because we understand that learning and development happens wherever young people are, and we have a responsibility to provide our young people with high-quality developmental opportunities to prepare them for adulthood. We are essentially concerned with elevating youth voice, and we actually run through the National Urban League a signature program, college and career readiness program called Project Ready. And so that began about 18 years ago, and it's now being run in 40 of our affiliates. And those programs are culturally relevant programs that are focused on providing Black and other underserved young people with those learning and developmental opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't receive. So getting, workforce experience, getting to travel to colleges outside of their locale, and a whole host of other opportunities. And so we, much like Brian talked about, work to marry our practice with our policy and really work synergistically to continue to advance equity in this space. And so I'm just going to speak to you very, very briefly about this because I want to be able to have a conversation before we close out today. So I'm going to share a few slides, and let's see, there we go. Very briefly on the agenda, I want to just, remind folks first of what young people were dealing with during the pandemic, the isolation, the loss of opportunities to learn and develop in structured ways. And so, when we are talking about policy, we rely on data and evidence, but we also understand the central role of elevating and centering the voices of the people who we're serving and who are most affected by these policies. From there, and we all know in this room how important out-of-school time spaces and community-based organizations in this field are. But I want to talk just briefly about the growing awareness of this, as some of my other panelists have talked about, and then share just a few highlights and things that we're looking at with regards to the local policy outlook related to city funding for out-of-school time, and then school and community partnerships. I'll highlight, a couple of bright spots in both of those spaces. But first, I want us to hear from a couple of our young people. Again, we have that Project Ready signature program, and during the pandemic, we had to pivot to continue to provide programming for our young people. And they actually came up with this idea of doing this interview video series to continue to advocate for changes both in the K-12 space, but also in the OST space. So I'm going to share just a snippet of that.
At first, I was connected at the beginning of the school year, but then as the year went on, I became disconnected.
So, Selena, with that disconnect, what actually caused that? What started it all?
It's just, we wake up just to stare at a screen for 6 hours a day, and it just, motivation went down, and I just didn't feel like doing anything.
So how are you coping with that? The fact that we aren't able to see our teachers in person and make those connections that we're used to?
I haven't really found a way to cope with that. I mean, in class, my teachers try to be engaging, but it's not the same as the classroom setting. Before COVID, class was pretty fun. I like doing projects, and I attended a lot of after-school activities.
Not being able to go to your after-school activities, has that really affected you?
Yes. I just, like, after school, I'm just at home and that's it. There's nothing to do, and I'm half the time just laying there. Well, you know, I was in NAHS, National Art Honor Society.
Yep.
And then I attended,
Back in the day.
SGA, Student Government Association. You know the senior shirts we got with Hey Arnold on it?
Yes.
I was the one who like suggested that, you know?
Wow.
So I just want to thank you all for taking a minute to watch that with me. You heard the young people talk about their challenges during COVID. And the reason why I wanted to bring back that video series was just to, you know, kind of level set. You know, school districts and schools were largely exposed for their lack of connection to young people and to the communities that they were striving to serve. And schools had to pivot, you know, and I would say that the smart district and school leaders and the ones in communities where advocacy was really strong made the decision to partner with OST providers and community-based organizations that they knew had deep, authentic relationships with young people. Many of these organizations are community-rooted and community-driven and have decades, if not a century's worth, like our Urban League affiliates, of history of supporting young people and families in those communities, and therefore we're uniquely situated to support young people's holistic development during this challenging time. But as we know, young people are still struggling. Young people also have a vision for what they want moving forward for their lives and the sort of learning and developmental opportunities they want. And so, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, advocacy is really central to this. But I wanted to just talk for a minute about the local policy outlook, both the good and the bad that we're seeing across the country. Obviously, I won't be able to give you a picture of what's happening in every city and every town, but let's start, you know, with the bad. Erik talked about it. The ESSER funding cliff is coming, right? The one-time infusion of cash that our local governments and our local education agencies received, you know, have to be earmarked and spending down on those. And that cliff is near. And so what we're seeing at the local level are a lot of budget cuts are coming. There was a survey of superintendents last fall around what they were planning on doing in terms of their budgets going into the 2024-2025 school year. And over 50% of those superintendents who responded to the survey indicated that they were definitely going to be cutting spending on expanded learning and enrichment programs and the partnerships that they had created to support them. But as we know, our young people have not fully recovered. Many have not recovered at all. And so many challenges still persist, including the lack of engagement of young people in their learning and development, and also with their mental health, as we heard from some of our other panelists. So the challenges are still there, and I really wanted to highlight that because this, as Brian said, really is a call to action that we need to continue to push and advocate for continued funding and supports for the out of school time space, because we know how critical it was during the pandemic and has been and continues to be as we come out of it. But there is also some good. As we talked about, I think the value of the out of school time space is becoming clearer. There is more awareness of the value of young people being able to continue to learn and grow and develop in all sorts of programs, whether that's sports, arts, workforce development programs, all the different types of programs that the out of school time field provides for young people. And in many cases, we are seeing cities and states committing to funding the out of school time field. So I just wanted to lift up one or two of those examples. And we're seeing this all across the nation, and whether it's large urban cities, the more sprawling areas, and some rural communities. So I'll just talk about New York City and then Sacramento. Mayor Adams actually just announced that there will be $80 million in new investments for their Summer Rising program, which is their essentially their suite of out of school time programming, of which community-based organizations and other out of school time providers are able to access to be able to provide summer opportunities for young people. So that's just one really exciting. They expect to be able to serve over 125,000 young people this summer, and that funding has been earmarked to be consistent funding for the next several years. Sacramento, during COVID, they took $2.5 million of the recovery fund dollars to start what are called youth pop-ups. So these are weekday afternoon pop-up events that occurred all across the city, mostly outdoors and parks during COVID, but now they're able to move indoors, where community-based organizations and other out-of-school time providers would run these pop-up programs where young people could learn about the longer-term programs that these out-of-school time providers had, but also just opportunities for enrichment, for fun. And what they did, which I thought was really creative, is they took young people from their programs and brought them into the planning and the execution of these pop-ups. So young people were actually getting experience, workforce related experiences with planning and running events, doing budgeting, things like that. So just really excited to see that many cities are taking up this charge after realizing that funding that was there to support the out of school time space and support young people through that was really beneficial to the young people, to their families, and to their communities. And I just want to talk briefly about school and out of school time partnerships and highlight one of our affiliates at the San Diego Urban League as a case example of continued partnership that is going on after seeing successful partnerships during COVID. The San Diego Urban League has been contracted with a number of schools over the past several years to run Project Ready at their own site, but also in schools. And seeing how the Urban League was continuing to support some of their young people in school, a number of the San Diego schools have now contracted with San Diego Urban League to bring their culturally relevant out of school time programming into their schools. So creating funding and space for them in the school buildings, specifically around youth who are continuing to face significant challenges, both in and out of school. So helping to provide them also with the wraparound supports, because they are a community-based organization that has access to health networks and other sorts of supports for young people. So there are certainly some promising things going on around the country, but we really want to continue to advocate and push for increased funding and supports for the OST space so that we can continue to see growth, ensure that all of our young people have access to this. So thank you. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly, but I want to make sure we get a chance to talk to people.
Yes, thank you so much, Horatio. You brought up some incredible perspectives. Love the video and appreciate the focus on the school community partnerships that are still sustaining themselves. Because I know the ending of ESSER dollars is on everyone's mind. I'm just going to invite all of our speakers to come back. I know we're towards the end of our call, but I wanted to ask a question or two. And certainly if anyone has questions, put them in the chat. I know youth mental health has come up multiple times in the chat and your own presentations. Erik, I know you had mentioned there is a potential bill forthcoming.
So the Senate Help Committee had a really good hearing with a number of young people and other perspectives last fall. They have been working since then on a comprehensive package that would address both on the health and education side. We're hopeful that there'll be a piece for out of school time as part of that. Not out there yet and no sense of timing, but again, happy to it's another opportunity for the field to raise voices, and particularly if you're in a state that has a member on the Senate Help Committee, it's easy to look that up. Reaching out to them and expressing the need, I think is key. And then there's lots of other existing funding streams and programs that can be used for mental health support for young people in out of school time and in the school day, whether it's through education with Title IV Part A and of course 21st Century, but also some of the CDC funding, as well as other health and human services funding.
Right. Okay. Thank you for alerting us to that. In fact, Kathleen and I are going to work on a program or two coming up later this spring, thinking about how out of school time programs are supporting mental health, accessing a variety of public funding. And then also thinking about the impact on the workforce too, who are also struggling, whether it's through secondary trauma or firsthand. And then the other question I wanted to raise up, particularly with Brian and Horatio, is, thinking about the need for more grassroots advocacy and how your affiliates on the ground are engaging in policy. Do you have any advice for the funders on this call, but also some of the other partners here of how we can support more field capacity to do this work?
Yeah, I can go first. So one of the things that we believe would be super beneficial is to continue to invest in the research, right? Just to continue to look into and to have these authentic conversations with affiliates to bring national leaders, out of school time providers to the table, and for us to figure out what's going on. And I love the video that Horatio was able to bring up, because you're able to see firsthand what students are experiencing. It's one thing for us to talk about this amongst ourselves, but when you actually have these authentic conversations with the students, with the parents, and to hear firsthand the experiences that are happening at home and at school, those go a long way. So definitely just continuing to invest into the research, continuing to invest into the work. Another area that we wanted to highlight is the area of flexible funding, or flexible spending, I should say. A lot of our partners tend to feel restricted at times when it comes to how they're able to utilize their dollars for programming. And so what we've also come to find out is that when there are all of these different tiers and barriers, it becomes difficult for smaller organizations that are serving the communities to be able to meet these criteria, and therefore it makes them ineligible for the funding. So taking that into consideration, and to be able to understand that not all organizations, not all out of school providers have the bandwidth or the capacity to meet certain criteria, that would definitely go a long way, and it would be able to provide them with the tools and the resources to continue to offer high quality programming.
Yeah, salient point. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I think Brian hit some of the really major points, but I'll just say I'll double down on the funding piece and the flexible funding needs. Many of our Urban League affiliates and other community-based organizations that provide youth programming really are operating not only on tight budgets, but on year-to-year budgets. So being able to do that sort of long-term planning, but also have the flexibility to not just provide programming, but also to be able to go out into the community, to speak to politicians, policymakers, to be able to do that sort of advocacy requires flexible funding. And currently the state of the field right now is really around restricted grants. And so being able to really have trust in our community-based organizations to do the work, but then to also be able to advocate, will only grow and support our field to a greater degree than it already has.
You're here. Yep. Totally agree. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so I want to thank our 4 speakers. Thank you, Erik. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Brian and Horatio, for sharing your knowledge, expertise. Thank you all for being here this Friday. Kathleen has shared a couple upcoming opportunities in the chat, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.